All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is going to be our fourth webinar in our eDiscovery webinar series. In case you haven't seen the previous ones, we will follow up with some emails post this webinar that will give you information about the recording of this one, but we'll also give you access to the other one where we touched on other topics. As always, my name is Sean Denon, CEO of Precise Discovery. And today with me, we have Bill Saccani, who's the president of our Discovery division. As always, we like to try to bring a subject matter expert in for each presentation. So Bill has a lot of experience in the eDiscovery field. He's been part of this Precise since 2002. So, back when we used to call it actually just Discovery, right, Bill?
Yes.
So he's been president of Precise Discovery for several years now. And, one of the things that we really focus on here at Precise is I would say we work typically in the smaller realms of eDiscovery, right? So part of the presentation and what we really want to talk about today is the fact that, eDiscovery is everywhere. And very often I'm talking with attorneys and speaking with people, and I hear all the time, we don't do eDiscovery. Well, the reality is that there's almost not a single case that doesn't have some aspect of eDiscovery in it, because eDiscovery is really just the collection and discovery of electronic documents. So if you've ever received a PDF production of medical records or anything of the like, you've technically done eDiscovery, right? So I think a lot of times eDiscovery gets thought of as like, hey, Apple's going to sue Samsung and there's, 10 terabytes of data that has to get exchanged. And don't get me wrong, that is eDiscovery. That's very intensive eDiscovery. There's a lot that happens there, but eDiscovery touches a lot more cases. And that's what we're going to go over today is kind of, the rest of the world of eDiscovery and the rest of the realm. So Bill, let me introduce you. So Bill attended Duquesne Law School and he earned his JD from Duquesne University of Law. All right, so let's jump right into, we're going to talk about some various data sources. Everything that we're going to do in this presentation, we're going to give you some information, and then we're going to kind of break it down and go through some like real life examples that we've seen over the years, and then just kind of wrap it up with some key takeaways. If you have any questions, feel free to submit the question. We did have a couple questions come in that were more, case specific and things like that. So we're going to follow up on those directly. But as always, any type of consultation here at Precise is 100% free. We love to jump on the call. We love to just talk about strategy, talk about your plan, and talk about, where you see yourself going with the eDiscovery in a matter. So the first thing that we wanted to cover today is data sources and all the various data sources. So I'm going to turn this over to Bill to kind of dive into some of the specifics around some of the data sources and what we see and where we see data being collected from.
Nowadays, data is coming from everywhere. It is coming from, anything that produces, anything that's electronic anymore, really. We see company computers, we see personal computers, collection of servers, external devices such as thumb drives, hard drives that people plug in and transfer data to, cloud-based storage for your Microsoft 365, your OneDrives, your things like Dropbox. That stuff is all collectible, and we've seen it come in on many cases. Social media accounts are another one that is highly collected. A lot of times you can collect it, whatever is publicly facing, if you don't have, a password or anything to get into the, back end of it, which most people don't. But you can collect whatever is public on the social media sites. People's cell phones are another big one for the forensics collections. They get pushed into data on the eDiscovery side. Just as an example, when we say it's everywhere, we had a case where we actually had to collect the hard drive from an Xbox to prove that a person was logged in where they said they were at the time of the incident that they were investigating. Another one that we had, kind of a role in was a person with a smartwatch that had a jogging app on it that allowed us to say what route this person took, what was their rate of speed, all this stuff that eventually came to light and was actually helped out our client and gave them a successful outcome. So, when I say everywhere, and that's just limited to what we know now. And as technology keeps increasing and more things get integrated with computers, then that number of, or that kind of universe of data sources is just going to keep growing.
Yeah, Bill, and I think that's a really good point, because I think it's not just about the data that we know we're creating, right? Like if I send a text message, I know that I just created data. If I send an email, I know that I just created data. But with the advent of these things that we all have sitting on our desk right now, this thing's creating data while we're on this webinar. So if you're logged into any social media apps, if you have different any type of health tracking apps or anything that's installed on your phone and enabled on your phone, that's creating data points right now as we sit here. So it's not just about the data that you're creating, it's also about the data that's just out there. And Bill, just to go into one more anecdotal point, from the social media collection side, people always think, it's not just like let's say someone posts an image, for example, and they post an image of themselves working out or doing something. It's not just the image itself, but it's the data that's contained in the image. And I'll give you a real anecdote example. There was one time there was a car accident where somebody, he was a younger guy, and he veered off the road, and he ended up crashing his car into like this big transformer thing. Realized, jumped out of the car, and what's the first thing a 19-year-old does if they get in a car accident at 2 o'clock in the morning is they take a photo of themselves and they tweet it, and they say, hey, just got into a car accident. Well, the person realized after the fact, like, hey, I just hit this huge transformer, not a good idea, bad idea. So they went ahead and they moved the car maybe about 50 yards down the road and kind of put it into a ditch and just made it appear like it just got into an accident in a different location. Well, we were actually able to take the latitude and longitude of every single Twitter pic is going to have a latitude and longitude signal embedded into the image. We were able to take that latitude and longitude and pinpoint the fact that no, this car in fact did cause the damage at the transformer and everything like that. So again, just an example of, it's not just what you think in the data, it's not just what's there, but it's also in the metadata, and it's also all the information that's being created that you don't know is being created. So, key takeaway from this is we definitely want to look for all locations and look for ways to collect relevant data. I mean, as Bill mentioned, we had a case where an Xbox was actually collected, and we actually got information from an Xbox. So a kid's gaming device was actually, a important part in a lawsuit. So, when you're thinking about potential data sources and when you're thinking about things that are out there, definitely keep your mind open to all the possibilities. Smartwatches, anything electronic, anything that's creating data can potentially be something that's discoverable. All right, so I think one of the biggest things that we see, especially with smaller firms, and that's kind of where we're targeting this presentation towards right now, is just your firm data management and access needs. How do you handle this data? Traditionally we would get boxes, right? We would get boxes in and have boxes of files, and they're all sitting all over, desks and things like that. But now we're just getting information on drives, like Bill said, or thumb drives or something, or the other side's producing data. So really, what do we do with all this data, and how do we manage it, and what are the best ways to do that?
Right. So, a lot of our clients, and we help out a lot, is, how much data are we dealing with? A lot of times you don't know at the beginning, at the onset of the case, but, you have to have that room to expand, so, and how much of this data and where is it going to be stored? Is it going to, does your firm have a place, a server big enough to store this data? And if you run out of data, how quickly can you get more storage run up and apply the get this data over onto your servers where you're going to be able to review it? Do you have the internal resources to manage the electronic data? Do you have somebody in-house that can shuffle this data back and forth, collect it, download it if it's on an FTP site, get it off of a hard drive if it's on a hard drive over to the system. That's all stuff that, you know, as attorneys, you're not really going to want to sit there for hours and watch and manage this data, kind of just transferring over, making sure that it's correct when it gets over to the final drive. You have software to open all these types of files. So, you know, whether you're looking at it as incoming from the opposing counsel or your own client's data, you know, everybody's computer, you have Word files, you have text files, you have, you know, log files, all these Excel, everything across the gamut. And do you have all the resources available, all these applications that you can open up all these different file types with? So if you get, you know, your client's computer, do you have every single piece of software that you're going to need to open these? Most people don't. And, you know, to be honest, new file types are created all the time, just like new devices. So there's a lot of times I run across new file types that I have to go out and research and find a way to open them up and see what the data is, or, you know, what data is contained within those files. You know, the nice thing about review platforms is a lot of these majority of these common file types are built in. They have a link to a viewer that if I open up an Excel file, if I hit on next document, I can go to a Word file next without closing out Word, opening up Excel, closing out Excel, opening up PDF. If I just hit next and then those are in line, it just automatically brings those up and allows you to review in a more streamlined fashion. And, you know, thinking about that, you know, whenever you go to produce data on your client side, do you have all the software capable of producing in a way that is going to be consistent with, you know, your protocols and the way that the other side is going to give you data? So those are all things that you need to kind of look at and understand before you can, you know, really delve into producing, reviewing eDiscovery. I think those are, you know, some key points to think about.
Yeah, Bill, like you said, I think the old days of just trying to find ways to open files and stuff like that has really been, for the most part, eliminated. As you mentioned, there's an occasional file type that you'll come across that's not supported in a viewer or something like that. But for the most part, these are all supported in the viewers, in the applications. There is hundreds of applications available. You know, obviously we have our tools that we like to use, but all of them are very similar in base functionality. And when we're talking about, you know, simple eDiscovery, pretty much any of these tools are good, right? So there are some really advanced tools out there that can do like really advanced Boolean searching and clustering of documents and all that kind of good stuff. And yes, if you're sorting through terabytes and terabytes of information, that makes sense. But, you know, just something as simple as getting all the documents into a system, into a review platform that makes it easy to click on next, mark responsive, do the simple things is really, really important in just your efficiency in managing the data. And the last thing that we always like to say is, you know, don't be intimidated by eDiscovery. I think everyone always thinks like, oh my God, eDiscovery, you know, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and everything like that. And back in the day, yes, that is true. You know, all the data used to have to be taken in and converted into a single system file, like a PDF or something, so it could go through these tools and review. But over the years, there's been such advancements in these and in the viewers that, you know, with early case assessment, you can look at the raw data, you can see what's there, you can actually search through it and poke through it and see what's going on a little bit before making that investment into producing all those and converting them to the right file types and all that kind of stuff. So like we always say, you know, don't be intimidated by it. It's likely not as expensive as you might be thinking. And there's so many tools out there that are available that if you have a small data set, you know, for, you know, potentially several $100s to $1,000 a month, you could have this sitting there in a tool, in a platform that's easy to access. So it's not super expensive. It's not the old days of eDiscovery. You're not talking about six-figure bills every time you cross eDiscovery. Okay, so this is one of my favorite topics. We actually have a webinar solely on this that my partner put on, Pete, a little while ago. And that's the meet and confer, the conference planning. So preparing for eDiscovery, going into it and really understanding. You know, I always like to tell people the better we are up front and the more clear we are about the data types, the file types, how we're exchanging information, what we're going to do, the better the end result is going to be, and the better the costs can be controlled. So, you know, eDiscovery, we've been in it for, 15 years at this point, but over the years, we've seen it evolve into more of this consultative model. And we do more and more consultations very upfront and early in this meet and confer conference planning. So let's dive into that a little bit more, Bill, in terms of like, what are we actually looking for when we're preparing for that?
Sure. We help our clients all the time and get preparing for these 26F conferences, as they're called, in the meet and confer. So when we talk to them, we kind of lay out that, this is a first opportunity to kind of meet with the opposing side, see what you have. And, be prepared with questions for the other side as well. They know their client's data better than you do. And you're going to have to know your client's data as well. But, what sources are you looking for? What kind of information do you need? Is this a case that's just in the workplace? So you need the work computer, the work server, data created there, but you don't need, a person's home computer if they don't work from home. If the other side's going to say, well, no, they're not allowed to use their home PC for work purposes, we can eliminate that. So, being able to ask those questions and getting a straight answer and being able to, kind of decide at that point, that way you can kind of cut back on data that's that you need to collect. Now, I'm not saying that you might want to reserve that right to go back and get that data. So this is a good time to, kind of talk through and ask for a preservation on some of this data that you may not need right now, but you may need later. So, you can ask for that preservation without actually collecting and doing the full-blown eDiscovery process on that. Then you got to think about what's best for your firm. Do you have a review platform? How are you going to ask for the data to be produced to you from the other side? That's a big decision. If you don't have a review platform and kind of you're silent on that issue, I've seen a lot of people come to me and say, I got this disk that was produced to me. It has all these TIFF images on it and these weird files that I don't know what they are, and a bunch of text files. What is this? So what that is, that's your load ready format that somebody just went ahead and produced it that way, but they didn't have a review platform. So, now you're stuck with either going back to your opposing counsel and saying, well, I can't use this. Can you produce this in a different way? In which case, a lot of times they'll push back and say, this is going to be a burden on us to go and reproduce this in this way. So, they kind of give you a little bit of a fight on that end. But if you ask if you don't have a review platform and you talk to us, we can guide you to what you want and what's going to work best for your firm. And as you're doing that, you got to remember, if you have a good strategy going in and you have a good protocol in place, and we have templates that we help our clients suit to their needs, it goes a whole lot smoother. And you can set up your expectations and the other side's expectations on how they're going to produce the data, how you're going to produce the data back to them from your client, and kind of save cost and by kind of limiting the data and not overly collecting.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the key takeaways here, it's definitely switched to a more consultative model. So make sure that you are looking at that up front. You're having those discussions with opposing counsel. You're preparing for the 26F. And then, Bill mentioned more about the data in which they produce the format and things like that, but also things about how can we eliminate, the volume of data, the junk data. What are the date ranges? What are the specific date ranges? What are the specific things that we're looking for? Who are the specific custodians? Now, once we collect all the data, obviously the tools will allow things like deduping, which is the process of, hey, if I send one email and there's 12 people on that email, and let's say 10 of them are custodians, and we collect that from everybody, well, guess what? We only need one version of that email, right? So we don't need 100 versions of that email. It's out there. So we reduce the data sets. We go through and we pull out all the system files and all those type of things. But again, if you're doing this up front, you can eliminate a lot of that because we're asking specifically for what's to be produced, not necessarily just, hey, the suit started 4 years ago. We want all your data from 4 years ago. That's not a good strategy. Okay, so let's kind of jump into that next level, which we just kind of touched on, which is the data culling and the strategic project management.
Sure. And as Sean mentioned, the got into a little bit more with the deduping, the keyword searching, date filtering, that all, that's going to apply to the meet and confer. So, it's agreed upon both sides. But that goes into whenever you're dealing with the data from your client or from the other side, that you can, filter by those things to eliminate junk files and things like that. So having a system in place to, produce or look through, review your client's data and in a streamlined fashion really helps out. You're not looking through Windows folders and opening up, individual emails. You can go through, you can do searches and things in a review platform a lot quicker than you can on a Windows database or a hard copy. Creating strategies to get relevant data so that you're not wasting time looking at junk files. And like Sean said, you start with a deduplication. You're going to get rid of all the duplicates, so you're only looking at one version of the file. But the systems are nice in the fact that they can tell you what custodians had that document. So it's not like you're just getting rid of them. It's a custodian A, B, and C. If it dedupes from B and C, it'll tell you that this is the original document. This comes from A, but B and C also had this document in their files as well. Date filters are a big one. You can't just say, give me everything. You can limit it to, when the controversy started. You could say, 2-year time frame, things like that. And that helps you limit the data that you're going to have. Keywords, of course, are it's an iterative process. You basically start off with what you think are good keywords, do the searching, see what you're coming back with, and then kind of adjust as needed. If you're getting overly broad kind of responses, then you start narrowing it down. If you're not getting anything and you think you should be, you kind of expand out. So the systems really nowadays help you kind of hone in on what is going to be the best way to get to the relevant data. So, and then, for us, the big thing is helping our clients get to privilege documents. So, we can do domain searches, we can do name searches and things like that for attorneys that are involved in a case that, we can kind of get those privilege documents kind of set aside quicker so that, there's less of a chance that you're going to find privilege documents if you're trying to get through a review quickly.
Yeah, so that's obviously part of the overall search term strategy. And talk about the privileged document retention log for a minute, Bill. I think those are interesting.
Yeah, so in the systems, what we do is, we have the ability to spit out all these privilege logs and all the metadata associated with it so that you can get these documents, in your priv log, which is time consuming for attorneys. If you're going through manually typing out title and things like that, the system allows you to go ahead and, export out any metadata field that's available, dates, titles, authors, things like that. And, we can get that out in a fairly quick time frame. For thousands of documents, it's going to be fairly quick for me to get you out a priv log, and then you can just tweak it and fill in as you need it. But it's just a way of using the tools to get things more streamlined and in a manner that you don't have to manually go through and type all that stuff out.
Yeah, and like I say, you're going to hear me say this over and over again, but eDiscovery has really moved more towards this consultative model and really being prepared and looking up front at what you have. So my favorite saying, across the board with everything is garbage in, garbage out. So, if we don't have strong keyword strategies and we don't have ways of filtering down this data and looking at it, we're not going to get to the quick relevant data quickly. We're not going to be able to take advantage of all the search terms and everything like that. So, having that strategy, understanding what it is we're looking for, why we're looking for certain things, having a strategy. And like Bill said, it's an iterative process. So we're going to continue to evolve that. So we're going to start to see certain hits on certain search terms, and then we're going to expand on those and dive deeper and things like that. But again, that's all part of a strategy that needs to be put in place versus, hey, I'm looking for this word, right? So it's like, great, we're looking for that word, but why? And how is that relevant? And how are we going to apply that? All right, so this is a fun one, the handling of incoming data from opposing counsel. So we've seen this in just about every possible format, especially when nothing is done prior at the meet and confer in terms of really coming up with like, hey, this is exactly how the data is going to be produced. This is what we're expecting. This is what the court's expecting, things like that. So, without that, we've seen everything from just, like Bill said, a disk with load files of no instructions on how to load that data, all the way to just, raw documents, inboxes being sent and things like that. So, Bill, let's talk a little bit about, how we're going to handle this opposing counsel data.
So yeah, it sounds kind of repetitive, but it's really a main concern with attorneys that when they have to be the ones to look through this, they need to know what they're getting and how to deal with it. I've seen, and like you said, I've seen load file ready documents just being produced to somebody that didn't really know what they were getting, so they didn't know what it was. I've seen, somebody just dump PDFs. I've seen people dump PDFs all merged together. There's thousands of documents. They just made one big PDF that wasn't searchable. That this is our documents. Here you go. I've seen searchable PDFs. I've seen like raw native files just given by the original file names, no organization, just dumped into a folder. And yeah, here you go. Good luck. Try to figure out what these are. Creates a bunch of problems. Creates one, how do you know what you're talking about with the opposing counsel? You don't have the standardized Bates numbering. You don't have anything like that. You don't have any searchable, not a really good searchable way or a way to search these documents if it's just dumped on you, especially with a non-searchable PDF. Now it's on you to make these searchable or break these out and have a better way of dealing with these. But if you ask for these things correctly up front and you know what you're getting, even I want to say review platform because that's what I'm used to using. But if you ask for it in a searchable PDF, it's a little bit easier to deal with than just flat 1,000-page PDF. So there are ways to kind of ask for things in a way that are more conducive to the attorney reviewing it. My preference is review tool because that's what we use all the time. And then that allows you to take advantage of the metadata that we spoke about, because now, if you just get a PDF, that's all you get. You don't get any of the metadata with it. You don't know who the author is. You don't know what the dates from the documents were. That's all stuff that is done when processing and easily spit out in load files. So now we can take advantage of that from the opposing side's incoming production in review. You can filter by dates. You can filter by custodians. You can filter by authors. We can go in and look at domains. And, if we see a bunch of Amazon.com, it happens where you ask for them to filter through junk mail, but you're going to get some. So if we see a lot of it, we can go through and look for domains where it's, a bunch of Amazon.com, and we know that those are irrelevant. So we can get those out of there fairly quickly without the attorneys having to go through every, your Amazon order has shipped. So, we can kind of help. And it's more useful that way to get rid of those junk files and useless data. If there's a pattern that we can, and that's going back to the consultation that, if we can look at it, help you decide this is going to be irrelevant, we can kind of put in a strategy to get rid of those junk files. And then you can save, the attorney save time by, only focusing on relevant data. They're not doing a whole bunch of nonsense of, junk mail review.
Yeah, and as you said, Bill, obviously the tools make everything easier. But assuming that, let's say this is even smaller than something like, right, this is like 20 PDFs that they're going to be getting. Like Bill mentioned, even just having that right file type saying, hey, we want a searchable PDF, we want it in this format, it's going to allow you to actually access that data and see everything. One thing that I just wanted to touch on real quick is we've mentioned the term metadata a few times, and I think everybody on the call pretty much has an overview and an assumption of that, but I don't want to assume knowledge on that. So when we're speaking about metadata, every single file has data that's embedded in that file that tells us the story of that file, when it was created, who created that data, things like I mentioned earlier on the call. In Twitter, you're going to have a latitude and longitude point on every single picture that gets posted up there. That's all what's called part of the metadata. So it's not the data that you see in the files, it's the data that exists in the files that when we're using these platforms and tools, we're able to extract that and actually make that usable in the case. So just wanted to touch on that real quick in case anyone had questions about metadata. All right, so now this brings us to, I think, one of the things that we've seen over the years is the pendulum swing, right? And that's what I always like to call it, where it's, it goes from outsourcing to in-house support to a hybrid support. We've been in this long enough to see that pendulum swing. Originally it started pretty much all outsourcing. That's the way that people were going. Then, obviously eDiscovery costs started getting astronomical and it's super, super expensive. I mean, back in the day, it used to cost $1,500 to process a single gig of information, right? So, costs were getting out of control and things like that. So firms look for ways of trying to bring that in-house to try to reduce those costs. There's benefits to that, there's challenges to that. But what we've typically seen is more this shift towards a hybrid support model. And we'll talk about a little bit more in that, but there's so much to be considered with eDiscovery. I mean, we have a complete forensics department, so we can go out and actually forensically collect the data. We have experts that can testify into the methodology that was used for the collection and things like that. So even firms that have a big eDiscovery department, we have partnerships with that we just take that one slice of that pie for them, and we're able to do that. So, any thoughts, Bill, on that kind of that hybrid support? Are you seeing that more and more today, just in terms of how things are shifting?
Yes, we are. It's a matter of, do these firms have the resources to, kind of manage and support this infrastructure? And, if they don't, it kind of makes sense to outsource parts of it. If you have a review platform, or, a lot of smaller places don't, but, even if you did have a review platform, these folks that are doing the processing and loading incoming productions from the other side, things like that, it's a specific, it's kind of it's a knowledge base that's not the same as admin or an IT role. That's what I get from a lot of clients. It's like, well, yeah, we have an IT guy, but it's a little bit different. It's not the same as, server, maintenance and upkeep and things like that. It is this kind of a specialized knowledge that you need to do these, and do them, because not everybody's going to produce in the same format. Even though you ask for it in the same format, there's little tweaks along the way that is specialized. You learn these things over time and working through them. So it's not as easy as just having an IT person and we're just going to make him do all of our eDiscovery.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Bill, because in my previous life, I was an IT person, and worked at an IT company about 18 years ago, dating myself a little bit here. But as I evolved more into the eDiscovery part, I saw that, right? So yes, there's components of the IT that match over, but we see that all the time where it's like, well, I have an IT person, I'm going to dump all these files on them, and they're going to know what to do with it, right? Well, in a lot of cases, no, they don't know what to do with it. They know the different system files and they can put them in folder structures and structure them for you and things like that. But, everything that related to eDiscovery is more specific to like eDiscovery project management, case manager, like those type of skill sets that you're really going to apply to that. The other thing that I wanted to mention, since we touched on IT, is, when you're holding this data and you're in control of this data, you really got to consider how you're securing that data. You are now sitting on the other side's files and things like that. So security is really, really important. Obviously, we live in a world that is post-COVID, which is a lot remote, right? As everyone can see my Christmas tree in the background here. So most of us are working from home now. Most of us are remote. So, even if you say, hey, we have a company server, we can dump that on there. How are people accessing that data? What's the security protocols? Just make sure you have something in place that's defensible, because if something were to happen and there were a data breach, speaking from an IT perspective, you have to at least make sure that you did everything goodwill to potentially protect that data. Things are going to happen. Even Google and Amazon get hacked at times, right? Things will happen, but it's all about, the steps that you took and you put in place to protect it, to show that, hey, we did make an effort, we did something. Whereas, if you were audited and there was a data breach and someone came in and saw that there was just open access to these files and things like that, that there could be consequences about that because you didn't properly handle the data. Any partners, there's hundreds of partners out there, that any good partner is going to look to work with you to really come up with the best solution. So what capabilities do you have in house? What review people do you have in house? How do you want this data presented? All these things, they're going to work and just come up with some sort of a hybrid model that's going to work best. Anything that you do up front like this is going to reduce the overall expense. So that's what we always say. There's a small investment up front to have some strategic consulting to make sure that things are being produced right and done right and things like that. But the savings, both on time savings and hard cost savings, can be tenfold as you go down the road and as you go down the path. So, spending the time up front, it's like, one of my favorite quotes is, if I'm going to have 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend 5 hours sharpening my axe, right? So think about that type of mentality when we're talking about approaching an eDiscovery matter, an eDiscovery case. All right, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. As I promised, this was going to be a quick one. We do have 3 other webinars in this series, and we're going to be doing a lot more in 2023. As always, our goal is just to educate, give examples. Post this, you will receive a recording from the webinar, and you're also going to be given an area where we kind of do like an ask us anything type question. So feel free to submit something there. There's also links to jump on our calendar if you'd like to schedule a time. Again, any of this early consultation just to say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, this is what we're looking at. What are your thoughts on this? How would you potentially approach that or anything? We love to do those consultations for free, just to kind of talk a little bit of strategy with you and come up with a plan in place. And if it makes sense that we're going to move forward and actually dive into some meet and confer and things like that, we can talk about that down the road. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have some productions and other things that you got to get to, so we'll let you get back to the grind of the eDiscovery. But again, I appreciate everybody's time, and keep in mind the concept of eDiscovery is everywhere, because sometimes there can be a smoking gun that can be so incredibly valuable to your case that it's not in an email, or it's not in a text message, or it's not in what you would traditionally think that's where you're going to find it. So, when you're approaching this, remember, data is being created. There's been terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data being created just as we're sitting on this phone call here, as we're sitting on this webinar. So just really keep that open mind. And last, one thing that we're also going to email out to everybody is we came up with a guide that was a 5 key considerations for self-collecting, right? So the collection of the data and how you collect the data is really, really important. Not every case justifies having a full deep dive forensic collection on it. So this guide is going to help you avoid some of the major pitfalls, how do you copy the data properly to make sure that you're not changing all the metadata when you copy it over, and just some simple things that if your firm is going to do, if you're passing this along to an IT person that's going to help with the collection of the data, this is just a guide that's just going to help you with some of the strategy behind that. So Bill, thanks again. Appreciate it. And everybody on the call, thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We'll send you some follow-up emails, and please don't ever hesitate to reach out. We'd love to talk strategy with you. This is all we do. Discovery is all we do. So we'd love to talk about it. Thanks and have a great day.
All right. Thank you.